I want to welcome everyone to the Unitarian Church of Los Alamos. Whoever you are, wherever you are on life's journey, whatever you believe and whoever you love, you are welcome here. Welcome to the Biblical Scholarship and Literacy class. This is our 27th lecture. And the topic today is going to be Balaam, the Pagan Prophet, and his talking donkey. Numbers 22 through 31. I must admit this is one of the most bizarre stories in the entire Bible, and therefore it is one of my favorites. It has everything. It's got a talking donkey. It's got cult sacrifices, blessings, cursings, a few good genocides, some army mass rapes, and all this great stuff. And it's also got one of the most ancient extra biblical references to a biblical character that we have, and so we'll get to go through all of that fun stuff today. I want to remind everybody that we've got this webpage, sites.google.com/view/biblical scholarship and literacy, and I put links to the lectures there. I also try to have a calendar. It's behind right now. I need to keep the calendar up that tells you when the next classes are, and links to all the YouTube videos and all the extra reading stuff I put in the slides are also here, so you can get to the extra class material, etc. So today we need to quickly review what we did last time, which was Numbers 1 through 6, and we talked a little bit about the Bible and abortion today, and then we're going to move on to the next story, which is Balaam the son of Beor. So, like I said, last time we did the entire Numbers 1 through 6. This is material at Sinai. Actually, material at Sinai goes all the way through chapter 10. And it has material like the placement of the tribes around the tabernacle, which we covered. And we talked about the test for purity and the law of jealousy. This was this ritual where they take a woman who is suspected of adultery, and she drinks this dust concoction. And if she's guilty, then something happens where her thigh swells or something, and something is expelled, and so possibly an abortion. And we talked about the theories about that, both in terms of possibly divine infertility is the curse, or possibly a divinely created abortion is the curse. And we concluded that we really don't know, and so the problem here has to do with proof texting. When we try to use the Bible to prove one way or another what God thinks about modern issues that are complex, like abortion, we make mistakes. And so the right answer to this difficult question has to do with ethics and other questions that are better answered in other ways. We can get general principles from the biblical text, but it's really hard to prove and use it to proof text our way through certain things, especially when we end up with the later chapters of Numbers, which will have very immoral material in it, which we will discuss today, including genocide and divinely sanctioned rape and things like this that are just horrific. And we need to be careful that we don't defend biblical inerrancy at the cost of God's character. And so when we take these stories as things we can use to proof text how we should behave morally, we end up with an immoral view both of God and of how we should behave. So that was what we talked about last time. We also mentioned this wonderful amulet, which had the priestly blessing in it. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord lift up his face upon you and let his light countenance shine upon you and give you peace, etc. And this is one of, we believe, probably the oldest quote from the biblical text anywhere. But then we ask the question, is it actually quoting from the Bible, or is the Bible quoting from an authentic ritual that may have preceded it? And we don't actually know. But either way, what we can show is that the priestly blessing, as described in Numbers chapter 6, is ancient and is authentic, ancient. And we have this beautiful quotation from it in this silver scroll that was written on the scroll and then rolled up and turned into a little amulet that somebody wore to remember the blessing that the priest would give the people at the end of the ritual. The book of Numbers can be divided up several ways. You can divide it in half by the first generation and the second generation, or you can divide it up by location. You can talk about the wilderness of Sinai, where it's just chapter 1 through 10, which is kind of what we covered last time. We can talk about the wilderness journey, where they go to the promised land. They send the spies, and the spies come back saying, we can't take over this land. It's full of giants. We'll all die. The people are afraid. God gets mad and sends them off to wander for 40 years. So then we get this wandering journey for 40 years, which is chapter 10 through chapter 21. And then we get the material on the plains of Moab, which is where they're preparing to enter the promised land, and it actually is the start of the conquest. We think of the conquest as being in Joshua, but in the second half of the book of Numbers is actually where the conquest begins. They conquer the material on the east side of Jordan in the book of Numbers, and then they have Moses gives a talk, and then he dies. The talk is the book of Deuteronomy, and then he dies, and then they conquer the west side under the book of Joshua. And so the conquest really begins in the book of Numbers. And that's part of what we're going to talk about today, is sort of the beginning of that conquest. So there's lots of different ways you can divide up the book. You can even divide it up like this. There's some details here. You can go to the webpage to look through this. There's a lot of material here. But what's important is chapters 22 and 23 are this discussion of Balak of Moab, who hires Balaam to curse Israel. And that is the material we're going to cover today. You'll notice we skipped a lot of beautiful stuff, like the serpent that is raised up on the stick, that if you look at it, you're healed. We missed all the stuff about hitting the rock and the water flowing out. So there's a lot of material we haven't covered. I'm going to, I believe, do one more day in the book of Numbers. I want to give Balaam kind of his own class. And then we'll go back and we'll talk about some of these other smaller stories that we've missed. Right up to the conquest of the promised land. So let's begin with the story of Balaam, the mad pagan prophet, and his talking donkey, and the angel with the sword. So, like I said, this is one of my favorite stories in the Bible because it is just so strange. So let's start in Numbers chapter 22, and I'm going to read a lot of this story to you, and we'll discuss it as we go, but this is just worth reading the whole thing. It says, the Israelites set out and camped in the plains of Moab across the Jordan from Jericho. So Jericho, Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. This is the conquest of the east side of the river Jordan before they crossed the river. Remember, the river is parted by the ark, and they cross in the dry ground, and then they circle the Jericho, and the walls fall down, and they conquer Jericho. And that begins the conquest of the west side of the river. So they're on the east side of the river. And by the way, I should mention that in the earlier chapter 21, they've already conquered several nations on this side. And now they come to the plains of Moab. And Balak, the son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. And Moab was in great dread of the people because they were so numerous. And Moab was overcome with fear of the people of Israel. They've already wiped out several other people. They're coming for us next. And Moab said to the elders of Midian, this horde will now lick up all that is around us, as the ox licks up the grass of the field. And now Balak, son of Zippor, was king of Moab at the time. And he sent messengers to Balaam, son of Beor, at Pethor, which is on the Euphrates in the land of Amrah. If it's really all the way to the Euphrates, this is like a 400-mile journey to bring this guy. So they go way out of their way to find this man. And they wanted to summon him, saying, a people has come out from Egypt, and they have spread over the face of the earth, and they have settled next to me. Come now, curse this people for me, since they are stronger than I. Perhaps I should be able to defeat them and drive them forth from the land. For I know that whomever you bless is blessed, whomever you curse is cursed. So what's going on? The king of Moab is scared that the children of Israel are going to invade his land and commit genocide. I don't want to put too fine a point on this, right? They're not there for what we would consider good things. In fact, with moral sensibilities, the king of Moab is the good guy. And the Israelites are here to kill, rape, and pillage. And he really wants some divine help. He's like, it'd be really nice if I could save my people, but I'm not as strong of a warrior as the Israelites. There's more of them. There's too many of them. We're going to lose this battle. The only way we're going to make it is if we get help. Well, it just so happens there's a famous prophet, and he is known for cursing things and blessing things. And whoever he is blessed is blessed. Whoever he is cursed is cursed. If we can get him to curse the Israelites, maybe we'll win. So he's not above some divine help in beating the Israelites. And he's also not above paying in good hard gold to find that divine help. So he's going to give Balaam a whole bunch of gold if Balaam will just curse the Israelites for him. And Balaam, he's a prophet. I don't know how much money that makes, but I'm sure a little bit of gold looked pretty good to him. So the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed, verse 7, with fees for divination in their hands. They came with money, right? And they came to Balaam and gave him Balak's message. And he said to them, "Stay here tonight, and I'll bring back word to you, just as the Lord speaks to me." So the officials of Moab stayed with Balaam. And then it says, I'm going to skip to verse 12. God said to Balaam, "You shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed." So Balaam's mode of operation is people come to him, ask him for something, and he says, "That's great, stay here tonight. I'm going to go find out what God wants." And then he comes back in the morning and tells them what God wants. Presumably he has dreams or something. It seems like he's having visions and dreams. So he has a dream, and in his dream, we assume, God tells him not to go. This is bad, don't go. The Israelites are on my side. I'm with them. They're going to conquer this land. Again, in the biblical story, it would be because I promised this land to Abraham, their father. The people who are living there are wicked. Therefore, the Israelites are going to take over, and this is my will. So don't curse them. So Balaam rose in the morning and said to the officials, "Go your own land, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you." So the officials of Moab rose and went to Balak and said, "Balaam refuses to come with us." Now again, if it's true that he lives over by the Euphrates, this is like a 400-mile journey each time they go back and forth in this story. So the servants go, they ask him, they spend the night, he gets the answer no, the servants go home, they tell the king. Again, that's 400 one way, 400 the other way. Then they tell the king, he said he wouldn't come. And the king like, "This is ridiculous. Let's send more money." This is for those of you who do believe in God, I wonder how many times you ask God for something and you get the impression you shouldn't do it, and then you ask again until you get the answer you want. That's what's happening here. We're going to ask until we get the answer we want, right? That's kind of a dangerous sort of thing to do, right? Okay. Verse 17. "For I will surely do you great honor." This is what he tells his people to tell Balaam. "I'll do you great honor. Whatever you say to me, I will do. I'll give you anything you want." He's desperate. Can you see the desperation? "Come, curse the people for me." But Balaam replied to the servants of Balak. This is the second time. "Although Balak were to give me all his house full of gold and silver, I could not go beyond the command of the Lord my God to do less or more." I can't do more than what God says. So remain here, and I'll go ask God again. So he's going to ask again and again and again until he gets the answer he wants. "And that night God came to Balaam and said, 'If the men have come summon you, get up and go with them. But do only what I tell you to do. This time you can go, but only do what I told you.' So Balaam got up in the morning and saddled his donkey and went off with the officials of Moab." So far, so good. He's asked more often than he probably should, but God has given him permission to go on condition that he says just the right stuff. God's going to use this as an excuse to declare to the world that Israel is his chosen people and to give them a good blessing instead of a bad curse. Right? You can see that coming. However, we suddenly get this interjection in verse 22, and I believe that this is, I'm going to talk about authorship later. This is all probably by the same author, E. However, it looks like E's got several sources and is himself combining the myths that have come down to him. Because suddenly E tells, and it's still in E's style, but he tells a slightly different story that kind of contradicts the one that came before. Now, it's possible to make this whole thing flow as it is in the text and make sense of it. But it is a little confusing, and it maybe makes a little more sense if we see this as a separate story about Balaam. But verse 22, "God's anger was kindled because he was going." Now wait a minute, God just told him to go, but suddenly God's mad at him. So there's two ways to read this. It's a separate story with a separate explanation for how he ends up going, one where he was told to go and one where he was told not to. Or you could maybe interpret this, if it's all from the same author, as maybe God just looked at him and said, "I told you to only say what I wanted but I can see that money's getting to you, and I'm mad because you're going, not because you're going, I told you could, but because you're going and you're starting to be tempted by the money. And maybe you're not going to do what I tell you to do when you get there, so I'm mad at you." So again, either way you want to do that. The angel of the Lord, so he's mad. So the angel of the Lord took his stand in the road as his adversary. This is one of the first references to Satan. As his adversary. The word Satan means adversary. But this is the angel of the Lord serving as an adversary. And as the role of Satan is not the evil tempter. The role of Satan is to be the adversary. Specifically in Job, the role of Satan is to be the prosecuting attorney, the adversary of the people, the prosecutor. He's not evil. He's not against God. He's the prosecuting attorney. And we use the word the Satan for that, the prosecuting attorney, the adversary. In this case, we have an angel of the Lord serving as his God's Satan, his adversary, serving as an adversary to Balaam. So notice, you can see an evolution of the view. By the time we get to the New Testament, Satan is an enemy of God. He's God's adversary. And here, he's an adversary against the people that God wants him to fight, not an enemy of God. So again, you see this evolution of the idea. Anyway, his adversary. Now he, Balaam, was riding on his donkey, and his 2 servants were with him. And the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with a drawn sword in his hand. So the donkey turned off the road and went into the field. It's like the donkey doesn't want any part of that, right? So the donkey goes off the side. And Balaam struck the donkey to turn it back onto the road. Now, there is a history of biblical reference to being stupider than an ass. Isaiah loves that turn of phrase. You're dumber than an ass and more stubborn. Well, you're more stubborn than an ass and dumber than an ox is actually the way Isaiah says it. But this is the same idea, right? Balaam is more stubborn than an ass and more blind than an ass, which is ironic because later he'll say, I'm the prophet whose eyes truly see. And there's some intentional humor going on here because he doesn't see. He's blind. He can't see the angel, but his donkey can see the angel. He's more blind than a donkey. Okay. So then the angel stood in a narrow path between the vineyards with a wall on one side, and the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, and it scraped against the wall. See, it can't turn aside anymore, but it's trying. So it's scraping against the wall, and it scraped Balaam's foot against the wall, so he struck it again. You can just see Balaam, like, it would hurt to have an ass shove your foot against the wall. So he's busy whipping his ass. Why are you hurting me? And so I love this imagery. So he struck it again, and the angel of the Lord went again and stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn either to the right or the left. See, before he just couldn't go one way, but there's still a vineyard the other way. Now he can't go right or left. And the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, and it can't get away, it can't go right, so it lays down. It lays down under Balaam, and Balaam's anger was kindled, and he struck the donkey with his staff this time. Right? So he's abusing this poor animal, right? And the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and it said to Balaam, the donkey, said to Balaam, and I love this very casual conversation with the donkey, what have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times? And Balaam said to the donkey, oh my God, a talking donkey. No, he doesn't say that. He says, because you've made a fool of me. And he's still mad at his talk. He's not surprised by the talking donkey. And maybe this sort of thing happens to him all the time. I'm just not sure. Because you made a fool of me, and I wish I had a sword in my hand, and I would kill you right now. That is not the reaction I would have if my donkey started talking to me. Not that I have a donkey, but if I had one and it talked to me, I would not react this way. I'm sorry. This story is just so funny, and part of it is horrifying, and part of it is just hilarious. And I can't quite wrap my head around the contradiction here. So I wish. What's that?
Are there 2 writers?
No, I think there's just. Yes, there are several writers here. We'll go through the authorship in a bit, but. Because you made a fool of me, and if I had a sword, I'd kill you right now. But the donkey said to Balaam, am I not your donkey, which you have ridden all your life to this day? Have I been in the habit of treating you this way? And he says, no. You've been a good donkey up until now, and you're just behaving really strangely all of a sudden, like you're talking. And the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, so now finally Balaam can see. And this is important. Remember, he's the seer who can see, and suddenly his eyes are open. And he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with his drawn sword in his hand, and he bowed down, falling on his face. And the angel of the Lord said to him, why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? At least God is angry that he's hurting the donkey. He's not angry that Israel's about to commit genocide, but he's frustrated that Balaam has hit his donkey. And I have come out as an adversary. Here's our Satan word again. I've come out as an adversary because your way is perverse before me. The donkey saw me and turned away from me these 3 times. And if he had not turned away from me, surely just now I would have killed you and let it live. The donkey just saved your life, and you're hitting it, right? Then Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, I have sinned, for I did not know that you were standing in the road to oppose me. Now, therefore, if it is displeasing to you, I will go home. If I really can't make all this wonderful money, I'll go home. Please? Right, now, you can just see this. All right. And the angel said to Balaam, go with the men, but speak only what I will tell you to speak. So Balaam went on with the officials of Balak. So there's that second time it says, You can go, but say only what I tell you. Again, two ways to interpret this. There's two stories about how he ended up there. The first is that God said to go, and he went, and it was all okay. And in that version of the story, Balaam is kind of a hero. You can actually read this story as Balaam is this heroic figure. But then you get this interjection where he's blinder than an ass. And in that story, he's not a hero. And in that story, the way he ends up going is he goes on his own because he wants the money. And then the angel almost kills him. His donkey saves him. And then he is told to go, but only say what I've been told. That's the second one. So you could read it as two separate stories. Then the other way to read it is God told him to go. He went. Then he started to be tempted on the way. Then the angel appears. Then reminds him, say only what I've told you to say, and allows him to go again. So again, there's two ways to read this. It could all be the same author. There could be separate authors. So although you asked the question about authors, although there are probably several authors here, it is very difficult to pry them apart. Both of these versions sound a lot like E. They're using E language. And so it's strange if they're actually separate. And yet they seem to have this doublet. So it's possible that E tradition has multiple versions of this story. And E himself puts them together. We don't know. All right. So he gets there. And what does he do? Balaam said to Balak, build me 7 altars here. I'm sorry, I should tell for people following along. I'm in chapter 23 now, verse 1. Then Balaam said to Balak is the king, build me 7 altars here and prepare 7 bulls and 7 rams for me. And Balak did as Balaam had said. And Balak and Balaam offered a bull and a ram on each of the 7 altars. Then Balaam said to Balak, stand here beside the burnt offering while I go aside. Perhaps the Lord will come and meet me. And whatever he shows me, I will tell you. And he went to a Beor height. I don't know quite what that means. Okay, so what's happened? The idea here is twofold. One, you can offer sacrifices to try to divine the will of deity, which is what he's supposed to be doing. But there is a tradition, and we still have some of this today, where you bribe God to get what you want. Right? God, if you just help me find my keys, I'll be good, and I'll treat my kids nice for the next week. Just help me find my keys. Right? This is the bribery of God technique. So you offer these sacrifices either as a means of divining God's will or as a means of bribing God to change his mind so that you can say what you want to say. So Balak is bribing Balaam. Balaam is bribing God so that they can get what they want, which is money or a sacrifice or to save my people from death, right? This is, okay. And of course, the Lord met Balaam and put a word in his mouth and said, return to Balak, and this is what you shall say. And when he comes back, he says, what has the Lord said? And Balaam uttered this oracle saying, rise. And his oracles come out in poetry. And we'll talk about the historical Balaam later, but he is a known ancient Near Eastern poet who gives oracles about the will of God in these sorts of poems. So again, is this a real oracle from this man, or is he a literary figure, or is a later Israelite using a known ancient literary figure to put these blessings in the mouth of God? It's not clear, but the blessing is this very, Israel shall triumph against everybody sort of thing. I'll look at 23 for an example. Surely there is no enchantment against Jacob, no divination against Israel. Now it shall be said of Jacob and Israel, see what God has done. Look, a people rising up like a lioness. You get the idea. This is what he says. This is clearly not what Balak wants to hear, right? So Balak says to Balaam in verse 25, do not curse them at all and do not bless them at all. If you can't do this right, don't do it at all, see? But Balaam answers Balak, didn't I tell you that whatever the Lord says, that I must do? It sounds like Balaam is doing a pretty good job of following the Lord's will, right? He's not doing anything wrong. So far, so good. And so Balak says to Balaam, now I love this. This is the same thing. Remember, they went to him. They asked him if he'd come. He said no. God told him no. Then they came to him again. They asked him, and he says, God told me I can go if I do only the right thing. And now I've come. I've done the right thing. And instead of saying, well, that must be the will of God, what did they do? Let's try again. If we just bribe God good enough, maybe we can get this done. So Balak says to Balaam, come now, I will take you to another place, as if maybe with a better view. This will work. Perhaps it will please God that you may curse them for me from there. So Balak took Balaam to the top of Peor, which overlooks the wasteland. And Balaam said to Balak, build me 7 altars here and prepare 7 bulls and 7 rams here. So Balak did as Balaam had said and offered a bull and a ram on each altar. Okay. And actually, this happens 3 times. I've skipped across several of them. In fact, one of them, he goes to a different place and he says, maybe you can curse them from here because you can't see all of them. So maybe it's too hard to curse all of them. Maybe you can curse this kind of subsection. That doesn't work either. Did you have a...
Yeah, can you remind me, James, about the sacrifice and what purpose?
Well, they seem to be trying to bribe God. And so this is a way of feeding the deity. If you go to ancient Greece, they talk, and there's passages in the Bible like this. If you burn the sacrifice, the smoke goes up to heaven and God breathes it in, and it's a way of sort of feeding your deity and offering gifts to your deity. So they're trying to bribe God into giving them what they want. There's a lot of bribery going on here, right? Balak is bribing Balaam, Balaam's bribing God, as if you give him enough sacrifices, maybe we get what we want. So this time he took him to the top of a place called Peor. Remember the name Peor because it's going to come up again. And it will be important when we get to later stories by different authors who have a different take on what just happened. So now he gives this third oracle. Now I'm in chapter 24, verse 2. Balaam looked up and saw Israel camping tribe by tribe, and the Spirit of God came upon him. He uttered the oracle, saying, the oracle of Balaam, son of Beor, the oracle of the man whose eyes are clear. I love that, because this is the guy who couldn't see the angel, and his donkey could. The oracle of one who hears the words of God, Elohim, who sees the vision of the Almighty, El Shaddai, in this case, El Shaddai. But remember that phrase too, because later we'll find a Canaanite passage talking about Balaam, son of Beor, and it will reference both the El Shaddai and plural deities. So there's a passage we're going to read from ancient Near Eastern texts that has verbiage that is the same as what we see here. This is the sort of language this guy apparently used when he gave prophecies. There was really some of these prophecies floating around. All right. Let's look at verse 10. Balak's anger was kindled against Balaam, and he struck his hands together. And Balak said to Balaam, I summoned you to curse my enemies, but instead you have blessed them these 3 times. Now be off with you. Go home. I said, I will reward you richly, but the Lord has denied you any reward. So why is it that he's not getting paid? It's God's fault. You're not getting paid because God won't let you say the right stuff. And Balaam says to Balak, didn't I tell you, the messengers whom I sent you, if Balak should give me his house full of gold and silver, I would not be able to go beyond the word of the Lord, to do either good or bad of my own will. What the Lord said, that is what I will say. And then to add insult to injury, he gives another oracle where he says even more good stuff about Israel. In fact, this one is so flowingly praiseful of Israel that it's one of the things that's quoted in the synagogue on the Sabbath. They like to quote this pagan prophet. And he talks about, in verse 16, the vision of the Almighty. Again, there's our Shaddai reference, which is going to become important later. And then in verse 25, the east story ends, and it says, then Balaam got up and went back to his place, and Balak went his way. The end. And it really looks like, although he may have wavered, he may have been dumber than his donkey, he got away with it and didn't say anything he shouldn't. He didn't get paid. He's probably frustrated for not getting paid, but he at least didn't do anything to tick God off. He's okay, right? Okay. To be continued. So then in verse 25, suddenly we get a story from a different author. It says, while Israel was staying in Shittim, the people began to have sexual relations with the women of Moab. So they're having sex. And these invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So either they had sex with these women and then the women dragged them off to a pagan ritual, or they had a pagan ritual that involved an orgy, which is much more likely. So there's an orgy going on, and it has to do with women from Moab. And thus Israel yoked itself to Baal of Peor. Notice the similarity of Balaam and Baal of Peor. Baal is a Canaanite deity, but it also is just the Canaanite word for Lord, like Adonai. In fact, there are places in the Bible where the word Baal is used to refer to God as the Lord. God is the Baal. God is the Lord, meaning the boss, the master. It just means boss, master. It's just a word, but it can also be a name for a specific Canaanite deity. In this case, it probably means the master of Peor. So it's not a reference to the Canaanite god Baal. It's probably a reference to some other Canaanite god who lived in Peor that they are worshiping with a sexual orgy. Going back, do you remember where Balak took Balaam to offer his last attempted curse on Israel? So Balak took Balaam to the top of Peor. Okay, so E has Balaam on the top of Peor, Baal, on the top of Peor, trying to curse Israel and failing. And now J has this story of a sexual orgy dedicated to the Lord of Peor, the Baal of Peor. And the Lord's anger was kindled against Israel. And then verse 4 of 25, the Lord said to Moses, take all the chiefs of the people and impale them in the sun before the Lord. This is good and gory. In order that the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel. So that's the response to the orgies. I mean, if this is how orgies always end, you end up impaled on a stake or something. And Moses said to the judges of Israel, each of you shall kill any of the people who have yoked themselves to Baal of Peor. And remember, this is because of the Moabite women. Remember, it was the king of the Moabites in E's story. And in here, it's Moabite women. And it's in the same place. Now we're going to jump stories again. P suddenly jumps in and says, just then one of the Israelites came and brought a Midianite woman into his family, into his tent, in the sight of Moses and the sight of the whole congregation of the Israelites, while they were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And when Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he got up and left the congregation, and taking a spear in his hand, he went after the Israelite man into his tent and pierced the two of them, the Israelite and the woman, through the belly. How do you pierce two people with one spear strike through the belly? Yes, skewer. This gives coitus interruptus a new meaning. This book should be banned. If you believe, that we should be banning books to keep them out of the hands of children, like this is one of those books, right? That it is not a clean story. So they were having sex, and he killed them in some sort of a tent. And again, there's probably some ritual connotations and some orgy stuff going on. And he went after, and then he took a spear in his hand. He went after the Israelite into the tent, pierced the two of them, and the Israelite and the woman through the belly. So the plague was stopped among the people of Israel. Nevertheless, those that died by the plague were 24,000. 24,000 people die of a plague. The plague happens at Baal Peor because they were involved in Canaanite worship of the master Baal of Peor, which involves some sort of sexual relations, either with Moabites, if you're J, or with Midianites if you're P. Is that, we got, okay. And then we have this, let's see. Then in verse 16, the Lord said to Moses, harass the Midianites, this is still P, and defeat them, for they have harassed you in trickery, which they have deceived you from the affair of Peor, and in the affair of Cosbi, the daughter of the leader of the Midianites, their sister. This is the leader of the Midianites' daughter's sister, something like that, who is the woman who is speared. And she was killed on the day of the plague that resulted from Peor. So there's this thing, it causes a plague, it kills a whole bunch of Israelites. Moses is mad, and Moses says, we're going to kill all the Midianites to solve this problem. And then we have, several chapters of interlude that just go on about other things, including the war and the fighting. And then chapter 31, we get around to the business of actually killing the Midianites. And the Lord spake to Moses, saying, avenge the Israelites on the Midianites. Afterwards Moses, should be gathered to your people. There's Moses, the last thing you're going to do before you die is kill these Midianites for me. Remember, by the way, Moses is married to a Midianite, according to J and E. But not according to P. This is still the P story. Kill the Midianites. P does not like the Midianites. Have you noticed this? All right. Verse 7. And they did battle against Midian as the Lord had commanded Moses, and they killed every male, and they killed all the kings of the Midianites. Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, Reba, and the 5 kings of Midian, in addition to others who were slain by them. Notice there is no reference to the Moabite king. I thought he was the guy we were going to kill, but we're killing the Midianites, not the Moabites. Again, authorship change, right? And then notice this is the line. And they also killed Balaam, son of Beor, with the sword. Suddenly Beor is killed, but I thought Beor was, last time we saw Beor, he was kind of doing all right. He had been stupid, but he'd repented, and he was doing okay. And suddenly he's dead. And then it says the Israelites took the women of Midian and their little ones captive, and they took all their cattle and their flocks and their goods as booty. Now, they take all those women and kids and children to Moses. And we're still in chapter 31, verse 15, Moses said to them, "Have you allowed the women to live?" These women here, on Balaam's advice,
he's alive again.
He's dead.
Oh, no.
But these women, on Balaam's advice, made the Israelites to act treacherously against the Lord in the affair of Peor, so that the plague came among the congregation of the Lord. Now, therefore, kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who has known a man by sleeping with him. But the young girls who have not known a man by sleeping with him, keep them alive for yourselves. You can imagine what that means.
Yeah.
Okay. We are going to have a whole class. Next class, we'll cover some of these other side stories, and we will address the violence and the genocide in the conquest, specifically in Numbers, that also shows up in Joshua. We'll talk about the historicity of these events and all that stuff next time. I want to focus on the Baal story, Balaam story. What happened? In the logic of the story as told by the redactor who put all this together, Balaam thinks about going, is told no. Balaam is bribed again, decides to go, but he can only say what God tells him. He thinks about not saying what God tells him, and a donkey gets mad at him, and an angel almost kills him. And he repents, and then he goes, and he 4 times blesses Israel instead of cursing them. And then we leave him with this whole, you didn't get paid because God wouldn't let you. And then off stage, something happens. Because on stage, women, either from Midian or Moab, start showing up and having sex with Israelites and convincing them to worship a Canaanite deity. And then a plague happens, and God kills a bunch of Israelites. And then the rest of the Israelites kill a bunch of Midianites as revenge for the plague, and they kill Balaam. And then they point out, in passing, it's a very poor way to tell this story, in passing, because this really should have happened on the screen so you could have seen it. This is all Balaam's fault. So what do we realize? In the logic of the story, Balaam would have looked at the sacrifice, would have said, I'm not getting paid. God won't let me curse the Israelites, but I know something about this Yahweh God. He's jealous, and he really cares about what people do when they're naked, especially if it involves worshiping other deities. So we're going to get our women to go have sex with them and trick them into this Canaanite ritual orgy, and in return, God will curse them himself. So I'm going to succeed in getting Israel cursed so that I can get paid. And we never told if he got paid, by the way. I sure hope he got paid for all this work. And I really want to know, by the way, if the donkey survived the genocide. I mean, this is a talking donkey. I really want to know what happened. And they leave so much out, and it's frustrating. Okay, but you can see what happened, right? He went off screen and said, hey, I know how to do this. The sacrifices, they don't work. Here's what we do. And this was his idea. And he got the Israelites to do this sinful thing. A bunch of them died, and then in revenge, the Israelites killed a bunch of Midianites, including him, and he died. That's the story. But again, it's confusing because if you don't pick up on that small reference that's not told, it's like 4 chapters later, and it's mentioned in passing, you don't realize he's responsible for all the stuff that was happening before. All this, immorality and stuff that happens before is mentioned, but he's not mentioned in connection with it. Except there are these name connections, right? Balaam, Baal, and Peor, which is the place where he was trying to curse the Israelites from. Other than that, so what now? I should have been showing you this picture the whole time, where he's trying to curse the Israelites. So that's one way to do it. You can make sense of the story as it sits in our Bible. It does sort of make sense. But another way to look at it is through the lens of authorship. E is telling the story of Balaam where he's basically a decent, does what he's supposed to and blesses Israel. And he gives this very famous blessing of Israel that is a prophecy of Israel's future. In fact, Christians see prophecies of Christ in it. And so it's this very famous set of passages. And then there's this subcheck with the donkey. Again, we've mentioned this, but you can see that as maybe a separate story that's kind of put in there. But who is the author? Is it still E? We're not sure. And then we get this story in J. And J is all about the the Moabite women. And then you get this story in P, and P is all about the Midianite women, not the Moabite women. And then he has also a story that this famous guy, Balaam, is involved. But P's version of events is very different. There's no reference to this famous blessing, because what do we know about P? The idea that a pagan priest could offer authentic prophecies is kind of contrary to P's way of thinking. So for him, Balaam doesn't offer authentic prophecies. He doesn't do the right thing. And in fact, he's the villain of the story, the real villain behind all of it. And P pins the secondary blame on the Midianites. P is probably an Aaronite priest, meaning he's a descendant of Aaron. E was almost certainly a Moabite priest. Not a Moabite, a Moshite priest, a descendant of Moses, not through Aaron. And Moses had a Midianite wife. E, in his lineage, given who we think E was from context, would have been descended from the Midianites. E is the one who tells us about Jethro. E is the one who tells us that this Midianite priest helped to set up the entire judgment scene of Israel. E and J think Midian is great. They have a theory, in fact, that Jehovah comes from Midian. He comes from the south. He's related to Midian. And P almost protests too much. And P wants to make Midianites the bad guys and wants to squash all reference to Moses' relation to Midian. And P exalts Aaron over Moses. Remember, J and E had Aaron being responsible for the golden calf. That's not the way P tells the story. And so we can see some political wrangling in how this story breaks up, and that might explain why it's as disjointed as it is. When we read it, it feels a little disjointed. The authorship might explain that. But again, you can make sense of the entire story as it sits, but it's difficult to read and disjointed, or you can see it in the lens of the authorship. The other way to do it is to just see the moral of the story. Because how many times, we call this kind of a lawyer's lie or a lawyer's God says to Balaam, don't say anything except what I tell you. And he follows God's word to the letter and then destroys the entire point of it all. Right? By later on having these, again, as the story is told in its composite form, there's a moral here. I do exactly what God says. I won't break the law, but dang it all, I'll get my money and I'll find a way to curse Israel while still keeping the letter of the law that you gave me. And no wonder God wanted to kill him with an angel and a sword, right? This is, but it's so easy to do that. We're going to keep the rules, but we're going to stomp on the entire point of the rules to get what we want, especially when money is involved. It is so easy to be tempted like this. And Balaam serves as kind of a story that we can use to keep ourselves from making that particular mistake, because we can ruin our lives that way, whether it's through God or just through getting caught. Even when we follow the letter of the law, if we don't follow the reason it's given, we can get in all sorts of trouble. So there's a potential moral of the story. From a biblical history standpoint, I'm finally going to get to this. I've teased it. But there was a building. It was destroyed in an earthquake, and the building had written on the walls of the building an inscription in ancient Canaanite. It's one of the first alphabetic inscriptions from the time period in the area. And very much like the Numbers inscription about, the Lord bless you and keep you, this one is one of the more ancient texts related to the Old Testament. And this text mentions a guy named, and again, it was written on this wall. It was found in an excavation, so it's probably one, there are forgeries we have to deal with. And people like to make money in forgeries by coming up with something that authenticates something, part of the Bible. This one was found in the 1960s or 70s, I believe, in an actual archaeological excavation. It's authentic. Most people believe it's authentic. And it's fragmented. It's very hard to tell what in the world is going on in this story, but we do know that the main character is someone named Balaam, the son of Beor. It's the same person, almost certainly, that we find in the biblical text. I have several translations of this, but here's one of them, and I have links to this in the web page, and I'll try to also remember to put them in the notes of the YouTube video if you're watching online. So you can read this translation. This translation is a loose translation because he tries to fill in the holes with what he thinks it says from texts around it. You can also find versions that just have the parts that are actually there instead of trying to fill in the holes. But the way he reconstructs this text is by saying, "This is the misfortunes of the book of Balaam, son of Beor. A divine seer was he." The guy who sees. Now, that's the introduction to the book. There's a couple ways to treat this. One, there was really a guy named Balaam, and he really gave a prophecy about Israel, and he really gave this prophecy, which is present in fragmented terms. That's one way to do this. Another way to do this is there was an authentic ancient story about a seer named Balaam. Maybe he was historical, maybe he wasn't, and the biblical authors want to make a point about how great Israel is. So what do? They tell the story that even the Canaanite, famous prophet Balaam couldn't curse Israel. And after all, he's the one who sees, so we're going to tell the story about how he can't even see as well as his donkey, and right? So there's a couple ways you could deal with this. The point is, the fact that we found a text with the same guy in it doesn't mean that we immediately need to jump to the whole "it's all historical exactly as the Bible says" narrative. There's a lot of ways this could have happened, and all of them are interesting. And I wish I knew. These are the sort of mysteries that just eat at me. So anyway, this is the misfortune of the book of Balaam, son of Beor. Divine seer was he. The gods, plural, came to him at night, and he beheld a vision in accordance with El's utterance. Do you remember who El is? He's the fertility deity. There's even a reference to fertility in here. And they said to Balaam, son of Beor, "So will it be done with not surviving. No one has seen the likes of what you have heard." So he has some sort of a vision of the end of the world where no one survives. And so he summons the heads of the assemblies, he fasts and he prays. They come to him and say, "Why are you fasting and praying?" And he says, "Be seated and I will relate to you what the Shaddai gods have planned. And go, see the acts of God. The Shaddai gods have established a council." Notice this, the Shaddai gods. So we got a couple references here. The seer, El, the Shaddai gods. These are all things that show up in the biblical reference to his prophecies. He uses the same sort of language, except here he's very clearly polytheistic in his reference. And the biblical version monotheizes his prophecy just a little. You see this. So something, again, it's very difficult to figure out what goes on, but it does reference the disease that was unleashed. There's some sort of a plague. And then we think he offers some sort of a sacrifice, and the plague is turned aside. This sounds very similar in many ways to the story we just told. He has this second section on the state of the dead in the underworld. We don't know what happened to even create that topic change. Again, it's very difficult to figure out the full flow of this story. But there's some sort of a plague. There's some sort of a vision of the end of the world. There's some sort of an offering to the gods that turns aside this horrible thing. The kings come to him, and he tells them of his vision and gets them to offer this sacrifice to turn away the end of the world. And maybe he takes some money when he's done. We don't know. But it would be in character. And I should add, this text is probably from around 700, 800 BC. This is really, really old stuff. So whatever we do with this material, there was an ancient story, an authentic, very ancient story about a guy named Balaam, son of Beor, who did this sort of thing and was famous as a seer. And it's interesting that the biblical text opens up with the idea of him being famous. Remember, Balak comes to him and says, I know, Balaam, son of Beor, that you are famous, and whoever you bless is blessed, whoever you curse is cursed, and I know this about you because everyone knows this about you. You're famous. So there was this authentic, famous person that this story is told about. That's it. I'm going to come back to the genocide material. I'm going to come back to the serpent. And again, I'm not putting that off because I want to just dodge it. I'm putting it off because it deserves a longer discussion than we can have in the middle of this Balaam material. But if you're interested in further reading, there's 2 links here that have translations of the Deir Alla Inscription. That's what it's called. You can also find it by the Balaam son of Beor inscription if you can't remember Deir Alla. But Deir Alla is the place where they found this thing. Again, I'll put these in the webpage and in the class notes. But here's 2 places where you can go and read about this inscription. One is, of course, just the Wikipedia article for this. And the other has the longer kind of, it's less of a translation and more of an attempted reconstruction of the material that's missing, because it's got material in the holes, and he's guessing. But it's interesting nevertheless. And there's also the Bible for Normal People. I recommend this every time. And season 6, episode 212 is titled Pete Ruins Exodus. He also has Pete Ruins Genesis, Pete Ruins Exodus, Pete Ruins Numbers, Isaiah, Deuteronomy, and very recently Pete ruined Joshua, for those who want some extra credit. His podcasts are great. He also has books called like Genesis for Normal People that are worth reading. And again, this is if you're interested in the perspective of a believer who is not a biblical fundamentalist, who takes this material and says, this is the people telling the story as best they could. So if that way of doing this, of approaching this material interests you, Pete Enns and Jared Bias, who do that podcast, are excellent resources for that kind of middle-of-the-road way where he keeps his belief, keeps his faith, but also admits that the text has some horrific things in it that we just don't have to accept. Very good material. Any questions before we quit? Or any thoughts? All right. Thank you for having me. I hope that the material we shared helps you on your life's journey, and I'll see you next month.
Do you know when?
Next month will be the 4th Sunday. I need to get a calendar to see when that is.
Yeah, I don't know.
But yeah, it'll be the 4th Sunday next month.
Okay, great.
All right. Thanks, everyone.